Let me introduce you to nested arrays. So, do you remember how we created a list? We gave it a variable name, which was myList, and we assigned it to a number of items contained within square brackets. So if I just put 1, 2, 3, just to have some example, and then have that executed, my list is now that container with 3 items, each of which is an integer. Now a nested list is now a container that contains not only integers, simple numbers, but that contains arrays instead of just single numbers. So let's create one. Let's call it my nested list. Our first example, we put a pair of square brackets, and then within the pair we put another pair, comma, another pair, comma, another pair. So now you can see 3 pairs of square brackets within a pair of square brackets. And now we can fill in some items, say 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, and 5, 6. It's just as an example. And now we have a pair of square brackets that contains 3 pairs, each surrounded by square brackets, so each of them a list. And if we now check the outcome, we can see we have 3 lists within a list. So that's called a nested array. Now you want to ask how many items are there, and you know how to test this with code. Len is our function to get the number of items in a list, and it can also be applied to nested lists. So if you put my nested list as an argument of length, you will see it contains 3 items. So items in this case refers to pairs of numbers. A nested list works similar to just a simple list in that you can do whatever you like with it, like change it. It is mutable, and my nested lists, and you can also append items at the end. So the interesting thing about the append function is you can not only append a number to the end, but you can also append a list. Now that we have a list that also already contains 3 lists, we can append yet another pair. Like what would that be if we go consecutively 7, 8 maybe? And then see the outcome of my nested list, and you can see now a list has been appended at the end, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4 items. And this can be taken further. This is one of the advantages of the programming language Python, that you can not only, with round parentheses as an argument for append a list, but you can also append a list that contains, say, 2 tuples. Remember tuples? That was the immutable type, right? So 2 arrays within that list. So you can add a list that contains 2 tuples, like what do we want? 10, 11 and 12, 13. If we put them into 2 tuples and then check what is the content of my nested list now, you can see all of this 2 pairs, 10, 11 and 12, 13, have been appended within square brackets, so as a list containing 2 tuples. Right, so now comes the question of how do we index each of these numbers using the convention that we learned before. So indexing went like, if we apply it to my nested list using a pair of square brackets. So index number 0 would be what? It's the first pair. It's a list containing 2 items. How about the last item in this list, referred to as -1? We can do it. You can see that is a list, the outer square brackets, containing 2 tuples. So if we go back to that first, in that nested list, to the first thing, which was the first item here was 1 and 2 as a list, of course, we might not want the pair, we want the individual number, say the number 1. How do we get it? Now, we start with what we did already, referring to that pair by calling it 0. And now if we want the first item in that sublist, we use a second pair of square brackets, and is the first thing there. So again, index 0. So index 0, 0 gives you that number 1, which is the first of that pair, which was the first item in that nested list. And finally, let's have a look at the last item in this nested list. The last item referred to -1 is a list containing 2 tuples. So how do we access each of the tuples? Well, pick that tuple by referring to it as -1. It's the last thing, the last item in that list. Pretend we want to see that second tuple. So what is its index? First tuple is 0, second tuple is 1. So my nested list -1, 1 is that second tuple. And if we want the first number of the second tuple of the last list in that nested list, we can do that by repeating what we had before, referring to the last and to the second tuple, and adding yet another pair of square brackets and saying what is the number 13 would be, or let's refer to number 12, that is index 0, and here is number 12. Right, so we have 3 pairs of square brackets because we have 3 levels of nesting.